The Forgotten Doctrine. The Vanished Women of New Light between 1847 and 1853. A staggering 278 women disappeared from a series of religious revival camps nestled deep in the secluded hills of western Pennsylvania. They did not die. They did not run away. They simply vanished without a trace. Their names were quietly erased from church records. Their belongings donated to local charities. Their families told only that they had been called to serve God elsewhere. For over a century, this systematic erasure remained hidden, buried in forgotten church archives, whispered about in old family stories, dismissed by historians as folklore. That is, until a demolition crew, sent to dismantle the remains of the New Light Methodist camp in Clearfield County, uncovered something buried beneath the floorboards of the main hall. Something that shocked the local sheriff's office so profoundly that the site was sealed off for 3 months. What they found beneath those rotting planks challenges everything we thought we knew about American religious history. It hints at a doctrine so dark, so twisted, that 3 separate denominations worked together in secret to erase it from public record and silence anyone who tried to expose it. But before we descend into the full nightmare of the New Light Methodist camp and the man who orchestrated it, I need you to do something first. Subscribe to this channel right now because this story has been buried for over 170 years, and there are still powerful forces that don't want it told. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and comment the state you're listening from, because the darkness that began in Pennsylvania didn't stay there, and you may be shocked at how close it came to your hometown. Let's begin, not with the disappearances, but with the man who brought them all together. The arrival of Brother Ezekiel Morai in the spring of 1847, the western hills of Pennsylvania were gripped by what locals called the Great Stirring. A wave of religious revival swept through the Appalachian countryside, intense, disorganized, and utterly unlike the polished sermons of the Second Great Awakening. This wasn't religion as preached in white-steepled churches. It was raw, visceral, emotional, and into this spiritual wildfire stepped a man calling himself Brother Ezekiel Morai. Where he came from, no one knew for certain. He claimed to have once studied theology at Princeton, but no record of his enrollment ever existed. What did exist, however, was his power over people. When Brother Morai spoke, women collapsed in tears. Hardened men broke down in repentance. Children spoke in tongues. It was said he could cure fevers with a glance, summon rain with prayer, and rid a man's sins just by looking into his eyes. Morai preached a simple but revolutionary doctrine: that organized religion had grown corrupt, tainted by politics, money, and pride. True salvation, he claimed, could only be achieved by total surrender to God's will, as interpreted by those anointed with divine sight. He called his followers the New Light, not to be confused with the 1740s revival movement of the same name. This was something darker, wilder, more controlling. The camp of the chosen that summer, Brother Morai and his most devoted followers established the New Light Methodist camp on a remote plateau overlooking Little Toby Creek, 12 miles northeast of what would later become Clearfield, Pennsylvania. It was accessible only by a 3-mile forest trail. Local families donated wood, labor, and supplies to help build what they believed would be a sanctuary for spiritual renewal. The camp followed a peculiar layout. At its center stood the Great Hall, a structure of hand-hewn logs with few windows and dim lighting, intended to focus worshippers inward. Radiating outward were communal cabins, a dormitory for unmarried women, and Brother Morai's private retreat, which was built partially into the hillside like a primitive cave. Most curiously, the entire compound was enclosed by an 8-foot fence, ostensibly to keep out predators. But its inward-leaning design suggested it was also meant to keep something or someone inside. The first to join the camp were the Weatherbys, Pennsylvania Dutch farmers grieving the deaths of 2 children. Sarah Weatherby, 34, a mother of 6, was deeply moved by Morai's teachings. 3 weeks after arriving, she disappeared. Her husband Abraham told neighbors that Sarah had been elevated to a higher calling. He seemed to believe it. So did many others. The doctrine of spiritual elevation, unlike typical revival camps of the time, the New Light community operated on absolute obedience. All possessions were communal. Men and women were separated outside of worship. And Brother Morai's word was law. Because he alone, it was said, could interpret the will of God. But the real horror came in the form of a teaching known only to his inner circle, the doctrine of spiritual elevation. Morai taught that some people, specifically women between the ages of 16 and 40, were chosen by God to be translated from earthly life to divine service. This process of transcendence was cloaked in secrecy and conducted by Morai and his 3 male vessels of light. Once selected, the women would spend days in prayer and fasting, speaking of visions and preparing for their final surrender. By winter of 1847, the camp held around 43 families, nearly 180 people. It was a self-sufficient community, growing its own food and maintaining minimal contact with the outside world. Children were taught to read and write using only the Bible and Brother Morai's own handwritten scriptures, which he claimed were divinely inspired. On the surface, everything seemed idyllic. The night of revelation, Sarah Weatherby had been gone for 3 months when her sister Mary arrived at the camp to demand answers. She met with Brother Morai privately. When she emerged, she was pale, shaking, and told her husband they were leaving. Immediately, they fled the camp that night and never spoke of what had transpired. But the real turning point came on January 15, 1848, a night remembered as the first revelation. That evening, the entire community gathered in the Great Hall. Morai preached for hours. His sermon centered on Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac and the willingness of prophets to surrender everything. The room erupted in ecstasy, wailing, visions, trance-like states. Rebecca Stoltzfus, a 19-year-old newlywed, had been marked for elevation days earlier. Her husband, Jacob, had been told that God had chosen Rebecca and that true faith required letting her go. Rebecca spent her last 3 days speaking of angels, fire, and the door that waits in the air. At exactly 10 p.m., the lights were extinguished. What happened next was never documented by any survivor. Silence and secrecy. By 1853, the disappearances had become impossible to ignore. A total of 278 women had vanished, each one carefully removed from church rosters. Local authorities never investigated, partially because of the camp's remote location and partially because no one made a formal complaint. Families accepted the narrative that their wives and daughters had been called by God. But in 1871, the new light camp was suddenly abandoned. No explanation, no warning. One winter, neighbors found it deserted. Fires cold, buildings decaying, no trace of the residents. It became a ghost camp, spoken of only in whispers. Then, in 1992, a demolition crew unearthed something beneath the floorboards of the Great Hall. What they found has never been released publicly. The site was immediately sealed. All workers were silenced under federal orders. Local media received anonymous threats and dropped the story. The hidden truth: 3 months later, historians from 3 major denominations issued a joint statement declaring the New Light camp a tragic example of spiritual extremism and discouraged any further investigation. To this day, all known documents related to Brother Morai and his followers remain locked in private church archives. But fragments survive: diaries, handwritten hymns, a journal from a camp child now preserved in a family attic. They speak of secret rituals, of bonfires lit at midnight, of rooms below the ground filled with stone altars and chanting voices. And perhaps most chilling of all, they speak of a door that opens only for the faithful, a door not built by human hands. What happened in those hills over 170 years ago was not just a cult. It was not just mass hysteria. It was something else entirely. And whatever it was waiting to be found again. Chapter 2. The Ascension of Sister Rebecca. On the cold January night of the first revelation, Brother Morai stood at the center of the candlelit Great Hall, cloaked in ceremonial robes of dark wool embroidered with cryptic symbols. Around him, over 100 congregants sat in silence, their breath clouding in the chilled air, eyes wide with reverence or fear. At the height of the ceremony, Brother Morai called for Rebecca Stoltzfus. She rose from her place without hesitation. Rebecca, a 19-year-old newlywed with bright hazel eyes and a gentle spirit, moved to the front of the hall as if in a trance. Her bare feet whispered across the wooden floor. Her expression was serene, but her gaze was locked on something beyond the physical, a point above the congregation's heads that no one else could see. Brother Morai placed his hands on her shoulders and began to speak in a language he claimed was ancient Hebrew. To the untrained ear, it sounded guttural and hypnotic, but several educated witnesses later noted that it bore no resemblance to any real Semitic language. "Sister Rebecca has been chosen," Brother Morai announced, his voice solemn yet triumphant. "She will ascend to serve God in a capacity that transcends earthly understanding. Let no one question this calling, for it comes not from man, but from the Almighty Himself." Rebecca turned to face the congregation. Her voice, when she spoke, was strong, unshaking. "I go willingly to serve the Lord in whatever capacity He requires. Do not mourn me, for I am not dying. I am being born into a higher existence. Trust in Brother Morai's wisdom, for he alone can guide you toward the light." What followed was a ritual unlike anything the community had experienced. The prayers grew louder, more fervent, more desperate. Morai called them soul preparation rites. The atmosphere became electric, half revival, half possession. Some wept openly. Others collapsed in exhaustion. At nearly midnight, Rebecca was quietly led from the hall by Brother Morai and his 3 assistants, Jeremiah Whitmore, Daniel Yoda, and Samuel Brennan. The congregation was told to remain in prayer until dawn. No one was to interfere. No one was to speak her name aloud. When the sun rose on January 16th, Sister Rebecca was gone. The Disappearance and the Doctrine Jacob Stoltzfus, Rebecca's husband, was told that his wife had been translated, taken up by God as Enoch was in the book of Genesis. Her belongings were distributed among the community, her name struck from all camp records. Jacob was told to be proud, to celebrate. His wife had been chosen. This was proof of her worth and, by extension, his. But unlike others before him, Jacob could not make peace with the explanation. That same night, long after the last candle had burned out, Jacob wandered the camp, searching for any sign of Rebecca. But he was not alone. Morai's assistants intercepted him at the edge of the woods, where the trail vanished into darkness. Their tone was calm but unyielding. "Brother," one said, "you must not allow doubt to cloud your spirit. Your questioning brings darkness upon your soul. Trust, accept. Do not hinder her divine journey." The next morning, Jacob's tools were removed from his workshop and redistributed to the communal tool shed. His cabin, once shared with Rebecca, was being cleaned for a new family. He was reassigned to the unmarried men's dormitory. When Jacob protested, he was met not with anger but with cold spiritual reasoning. "You must now commit more fully to the community," Brother Morai explained. "The Lord has claimed your wife. You have been released from worldly attachment." A community of quiet fear others began to sense something was wrong, particularly Martha Brennan, a 45-year-old widow and mother figure to many of the camp's younger women. Chapter 3. The Hidden Harvest. By the spring of 1849, the original 43 families of the New Light Methodist camp had diminished to just 31. One by one, families left in silence after their daughters or wives were selected for translation. They did not speak out. They did not look back. They simply vanished from the camp as quietly as the women had. More disturbing than the decline in numbers was the shifting demographic. The community now housed far more single men than women. This imbalance prompted Brother Morai to introduce what he called spiritual marriages, unions blessed by God, but unrecognized by any earthly authority. These partnerships allowed for new women to be brought in from the outside, often young, vulnerable women who had nowhere else to go. They were promised community, purpose, and spiritual transcendence. But for most, it would become something else entirely. A new form of recruitment efforts evolved. Morai's assistants, Samuel Brennan, Jeremiah Whitmore, and Daniel Yoda, began attending revival meetings and church gatherings across western Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio, and northern West Virginia. They weren't looking for the devout. They were looking for the desperate. Women who were spiritually searching, Economically disadvantaged, socially isolated, these were the targets. The assistants would befriend them, offer comfort and guidance, and plant the seed of a new life at the camp. A life, they promised, devoted to God's higher calling. Among those watching this unfold was Martha Brennan, now increasingly trapped by her circumstances. Her suspicions about Brother Morai had grown into quiet terror, but she felt helpless. Her nephew Samuel was among Morai's closest lieutenants. Her husband had died years earlier. Her children lived far away, and like everyone in the camp, she had contributed all her savings to the communal fund. Leaving meant abandoning what little she had left, including family. Then, in May of 1849, a new arrival changed everything. Catherine Mueller and the Fracture of Faith. Catherine Mueller arrived claiming to be fleeing an abusive husband in Pittsburgh. But from the moment she entered the camp, it was clear Catherine was different. She was educated, literate, and fiercely independent. She had contacts in the outside world. She asked questions. She took notes. And Brother Morai was immediately fascinated. He spent hours in private counsel with her. Within weeks, Catherine was elevated to a leadership role, something that usually took months or even years. It was clear she was being prepared for translation, but unlike the others, Catherine didn't surrender. She began having what she described as dark visions, vivid dreams that seemed to contradict Morai's teachings. She spoke of fires beneath the earth, of women trapped in silence, of something monstrous hiding behind the veil of holy doctrine. Then, the night before her scheduled translation, Catherine approached Martha with a request that would alter both of their lives. "Help me search Brother Morai's private quarters." The search in the hillside they chose the night of June 3, 1849. Midnight. Brother Morai would be in his divine communion, a nightly ritual that lasted hours. The camp would be still, the forest silent. Martha carried a set of master keys stolen from Samuel's quarters, keys meant only for emergencies. Catherine brought a small lantern. She claimed her visions had shown her exactly where to look. Morai's quarters, carved into the hillside, felt colder than the night outside. It was partially underground, built from stone. There was only one entrance. Even the forest sounds seemed to avoid the structure. The first room appeared ordinary. A desk, shelves of religious texts, a simple bed. But Catherine moved to the far wall, feeling the stone. "There," she whispered. A faint click, then a hidden door swung open. The stench was immediate: damp earth, decay, and something fouler. Both women gagged. Behind the door was a hidden chamber larger than the room itself. Carved directly into the hillside, the walls were covered in crude drawings and obsessively neat handwriting, a record of every translation. But these were no religious testimonies. They were scientific, cold, clinical. It was called the harvesting process. The truth in the journals in Brother Morai's own handwriting. Each journal entry described the preparation of a woman for elevation. Weeks of isolation. Diets designed to weaken the body. Spiritual conditioning to dismantle identity and instill submission. Catherine read aloud as Martha held the lantern. Her hands shook. The translation rituals the community witnessed were only the beginning. The true ceremony took place in this chamber, alone, underground. The final entries grew cryptic, suggesting the women were not being taken to God at all. One entry read, "When the veil lifts, they are no longer theirs. They are ours. The sacrifice sanctifies the vessel." Then Catherine found a second journal, this one filled with correspondence. Letters from and to individuals identified only by initials. They spoke of deliveries, training, and merchandise. The language was coded, but unmistakably commercial. Even more disturbing was a map. A network across states spread across the pages was a detailed map of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. Each red mark represented a religious camp, revival site, or isolated church community. Every mark came with numbers, counts of women taken. Some notes referenced cooperation with local sheriffs or pastors. Others listed dates of delivery. The new light camp was not an anomaly. It was a hub in a vast network. transport routes, safe houses, final destinations. The map detailed it all. The scope of the operation chilled Martha to the core. This wasn't a cult. It was organized human trafficking, masquerading as religious salvation. And it had supporters in pulpits, police stations, and perhaps even the Pennsylvania state capitol. Trophies and timelines. As they explored further, Catherine found a chest lined with velvet. Inside were personal belongings, locks of hair, rings, hand-sewn handkerchiefs, items taken from the translated women. Each was tagged, dated. The display felt like a shrine, not to faith, but to possession. The final document was a schedule, typed, with names marked in red. 12 women, scheduled for final elevation in the summer of 1849. Their names were already known to the camp. Their fates, unless stopped, were already sealed. The beginning of the end. The two women fled the chamber and returned to their cabins in silence. Neither slept. What they had seen was too much to comprehend, and too dangerous to ignore. That night marked the beginning of the unraveling. Within days, whispers began to circulate. A missing journal, a found necklace, a name that reappeared in an old ledger. What Catherine and Martha uncovered would ignite a firestorm of confrontation, conspiracy, and cover-up. But it would also give birth to the first resistance. The final chapter of the new light camp was about to begin, and it would not end quietly. Catherine's name stood chillingly at the top of the list. Just beneath it was Martha's. The revelation that both women had been marked for translation, the cult's twisted euphemism for removal, triggered a panic that nearly got them caught. Their frantic escape from the secret chamber was a blur of whispers and trembling hands. As they gathered their belongings, Catherine, determined and breathless, insisted on taking a few crucial documents as evidence. But Martha, ever the cautious one, pleaded with her to leave everything undisturbed. She feared that Brother Morai would quickly sense the breach if anything was out of place. Their hushed argument was cut short by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. Brother Morai's nightly communion had ended sooner than expected. With hearts pounding, the two women barely managed to climb out a narrow window, abandoning their lantern and scattering several papers in the rush. They spent the rest of the night hidden in Catherine's cabin, their minds racing. Escape or exposure? Contact the authorities, or vanish without a trace? The questions hung heavy in the stale air, but fate robbed them of the luxury of choice. The next morning, during the community's breakfast gathering, Brother Morai made a stunning announcement. Sister Catherine had received a divine vision during the night. It was urgent, he claimed, and required immediate translation. The ceremony would be held that very evening, with no time for the usual days of spiritual preparation. For Martha, the meaning was clear. Their secret discovery had been detected. Catherine's translation was not a sacred rite. It was a cover for execution. She rushed to warn her friend, only to discover the young woman was already gone. Catherine had vanished from her cabin sometime before dawn. A discreet search revealed all her personal belongings had been removed. Whispers around the camp claimed she had been called away for urgent spiritual duties. The lie was well rehearsed, smoothly delivered. To most, it sounded believable, but to Martha, it was confirmation of her worst fears. The terrifying efficiency of the disappearance stunned her. Catherine had been silenced, erased within hours. Martha now knew the truth. Brother Morai's network was more sophisticated than she had imagined. Could identify a threat, neutralize it, and cover the evidence in less than a day. She began quietly searching for allies among the remaining families. But what she found instead was fear. Most of the community was either too indoctrinated or too terrified to act. Her own nephew, Samuel, gave her a gentle but chilling response to her carefully phrased questions. He suggested she seek spiritual counseling to quiet her troubled mind. It was a warning masked as concern, and a sign that she had been marked for special attention by Daniel Yoda, Morai's assistant and the camp's unofficial enforcer of obedience. Now truly alone, Martha's situation grew more desperate. Catherine was gone, likely dead. The evidence they had uncovered was back in Morai's chamber. and she had no way to alert the outside world without alerting the leadership. But in Catherine's disappearance, Martha found grim motivation. The rumors of translation as something far darker, possibly slavery or ritual sacrifice, could no longer be dismissed. If no one else would expose the horror, then she would. Even if it cost her life. The challenge was immense. How to gather enough evidence, escape undetected, and get that evidence into the hands of someone who could stop it all. Salvation came from an unexpected place. A small, almost forgotten detail Catherine had once shared during their partnership. It was a secret, a method, a way back into the chamber without detection. It was risky, but it might be their only hope. 3 days later, Brother Morai announced a special spiritual cleansing to prepare for what he ominously called the final harvest. All members were to remain confined to their quarters for 3 full days of fasting and meditation. No food, no conversation, no movement without spiritual cause. Assistants would patrol the grounds to ensure discipline. But their routines were predictable. Martha had studied them closely. The fast gave her cover. If she was seen wandering at odd hours, she could claim it was for solitary prayer. If she appeared weak or confused, it would be blamed on the fast. But most importantly, Morai and his assistants would be too busy managing the fast to notice her slipping away. On the night of June 7th, Martha made her move. Under the cloak of darkness, she crept across the camp to Brother Morai's quarters. The building was dimly lit. She could hear the low murmur of Morai's voice, reciting scripture or perhaps conducting a private ritual. Using the hidden latch Catherine had shown her, she found the secret door and slipped into the chamber. This time she was ready. She brought a small candle and several cloth bags to carry documents. What she found was worse than she remembered. The twisted shrine had grown, now including Catherine's necklace and a silver hairpin. Undeniable confirmation of her fate. A new horror awaited in the journals. Entries about Martha herself. Her behaviors, moods, weaknesses. Detailed psychological notes that mapped her like prey. Morai had been studying her, preparing her, and then a breakthrough. Beneath a loose floorboard, Martha discovered a hidden stash of letters. Correspondence between Brother Morai and someone known only by the initials J.R. The letters, postmarked from Philadelphia, discussed the camp's productivity and contained directives for expanding operations to other regions. The most recent one, dated just 2 weeks prior, referenced the Brennan problem. It outlined Martha's growing suspicions and ordered that she be processed immediately to avoid exposure. Another note chillingly reported that the Mueller asset had been compromised and would be retired before her delivery. Suddenly, Catherine's presence at the camp made sense. She hadn't arrived by chance. She'd been planted, perhaps to test security or to gather intel. Her visions, her knowledge of the chamber, someone had armed her with that. But the mission had failed. She'd been found out and silenced. This discovery changed everything. It wasn't just one cult leader orchestrating this horror. It was a vast professional network with deep connections and dark goals. The letters referenced established churches, local sheriffs, even federal officials, collaborators who helped cover the disappearances or provided legal shields. One report read like an inventory of human lives, analyzing the value of different women and how best to condition them for sale. The tone was cold, clinical. They weren't seen as people but as commodities. One document, more chilling than the rest, outlined plans for the final harvest. 12 camps across 3 states would be shut down in unison. All remaining women were to be translated, records destroyed, and leadership relocated to new, untouchable territories further west. It was a final sweep, an erasure of hundreds of lives under the guise of spiritual rebirth. The scale of it paralyzed Martha with dread. This was no fringe cult. It was a trafficking empire disguised as religious salvation. And time was running out. The plan's execution was imminent. Her only hope now was to get the letters out, to expose the truth before she, too, vanished forever. The final harvest was scheduled to begin in just 2 weeks, starting with the New Light Methodist camp. Martha's name appeared on the priority list, along with other women deemed problematic. those who asked too many questions or had ties to the outside world. As she clutched the stolen documents she had unearthed in Brother Morai's hidden chamber, a grim realization set in. She was no longer an observer. She was a target. She turned to leave, every sense heightened. But then she heard it. Footsteps outside the chamber, deliberate and quick. Not the slow, ceremonial stride of Brother Morai. Someone was approaching, and they knew she was there. Her stomach dropped. Perhaps one of the assistants had noticed her absence or caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows. She froze as the steps stopped outside the door. Low voices murmured. Her grip tightened on the papers, but she was trapped. Escape meant confrontation. The candle in her hand suddenly felt too bright. Its flickering glow might give her away. She extinguished it with shaking fingers, plunging the chamber into pitch-black silence. Just then, she heard the jingle of keys being inserted into the outer lock. Someone was entering Brother Morai's private quarters. If they found the hidden entrance, it would all be over. Martha stood motionless, heart hammering in her chest, trying to control her breath. The door creaked open. A familiar voice followed, measured, calm, unmistakably his. "Sister Martha," Brother Morai called gently. "I know you're in there. Come out. Let's talk about what you've discovered. I believe your understanding of our holy work is incomplete." Terror gripped her, but she stayed silent in the shadows. The documents she held might be the only thing that could expose the network responsible for the disappearance of so many women. Yet if she was caught, she would join them in whatever twisted fate awaited. Brother Morai's voice softened further. "I understand your confusion. Catherine Miller filled your thoughts with disturbing misinterpretations. She was an agent of darkness, sent to test our faith. Surely you see that now." His words, so casual and composed, made her blood run cold. He spoke of Catherine as if she were a mild inconvenience, not a human being who had tried to warn others and paid the ultimate price. Martha inched back, pressing herself into the furthest corner of the chamber. "The work we do is difficult for mortal minds to grasp," he continued. She could hear him walking through the room, lighting candles, settling in. "The women we've translated, they're not victims. They're fulfilling a sacred role. Their simple lives are now part of something greater." A chair scraped against the stone floor. He was positioning himself between her and the door. He wasn't just waiting. He was confident, convinced she had no choice but to listen. "You see, Sister Martha, the modern church has grown weak, softened by false compassion. But God's chosen are meant to rule. The weak are to serve. The women we translate are not being harmed. They are being elevated, returned to their rightful station." Martha's breath caught. The way he spoke, so calm, so sure, revealed a fanaticism that chilled her to the bone. He wasn't simply covering up a trafficking ring. He believed every word of his twisted doctrine. To him, the abuse, the control, it was all sanctified. "You uncovered the network," he said, and she heard the rustle of papers. Her papers. He was reading her findings aloud. "This operation is restoring the natural order. Throughout history, the strong lead and the weak obey. We are merely continuing that truth." The horror deepened. He was using her stolen evidence as a lesson, twisting facts into religious rhetoric. "The camps," he went on, "are more than gathering points. They are laboratories, places to refine the translation process. Our techniques are now shared with partners across the nation, even internationally." Martha's stomach turned. This wasn't just a cult tucked away in the Pennsylvania hills. It was part of something far more massive, a coordinated system designed to indoctrinate and enslave on a global scale. "The final harvest is not an end," he continued, his tone now reverent. "It is a beginning. Our methods are ready. Women from this camp have helped launch operations in 12 cities, with more underway each month." Martha's head spun. Each woman processed here was used to expand the reach of this machine. Camps, recruits, a network growing like a cancer beneath society's surface. This was a national infestation. Then came the worst blow. "Your nephew Samuel?" Brother Morai said with almost paternal pride, has been a tremendous help. His understanding of psychological conditioning is extraordinary. He speaks so highly of your strength, your clarity. That's why I'm giving you a choice others haven't received. The air left her lungs. Samuel, her blood, was part of this. His insights, his techniques had helped perfect the system. And now he had vouched for her. That cut deeper than anything. You can join us, Sister Martha, Brother Morai said. Help lead, guide the new generation. Or you can resist and be processed. Either way, you will serve. You were born to. Footsteps again, closer. The hidden door creaked. Candlelight slipped through the crack as it opened. Brother Morai stood in the doorway, silhouette framed in warm glow. But it wasn't the kind-eyed preacher she once knew. This man's eyes were ice, calculating, predatory. The choice is yours, he said. Willing servant or unwilling commodity. But you will serve. Martha didn't think. She acted. With a surge of adrenaline, she lunged for the chamber's only window, a narrow opening she had noticed during her earlier search. She hurled herself forward, shattering the glass. Razor-edged shards tore at her arms and face as she crashed through. Pain bloomed instantly. Her ankle twisted violently when she hit the ground outside. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her body screamed in protest, but adrenaline carried her forward. She gripped the bloodied documents tightly, knowing they were her only hope. Each breath was a desperate gulp of cold night air. Each heartbeat a drum of resistance against the monster she had left behind. Behind her, she could hear the faint echo of Brother Morai's voice, calm, almost amused. This wasn't over, and Martha knew she would need more than just evidence to stop what was coming. Behind her, Brother Morai's voice echoed through the trees, no longer calm, now cracked with panic as he realized his prisoner had escaped. Martha didn't stop. She ran through the dark forest, blindly following barely remembered paths, driven by a single desperate mission. Reach the outside world with the evidence she clutched, soaked in blood and sweat. Every shadow whispered danger. Every snapped twig behind her made her heart pound faster. She was certain Morai's assistants were close. Still, she pushed forward, ignoring the throbbing pain in her ankle and the blood trickling from cuts along her legs and arms. The sound of horses began to thunder behind her. The search had grown into an organized pursuit. But then something else. Dogs barking in the far distance. It wasn't Morai's men. It was hope. She was close to a settlement. That meant safety. That meant she might make it. What followed was a nightmarish blur. Martha stumbled, dragged herself forward, breath ragged, ankle nearly unusable. But she couldn't stop. Not when the documents hidden in her bloody dress carried the voices of the silenced, the testimonies of women who would never be heard again. She refused to let their pain go unacknowledged. She refused to die here. At dawn, on June 8, 1849, she reached Clearfield. Barely conscious and covered in blood, she collapsed on the steps of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Thomas Mackenzie looked at her like she was mad, dismissing her desperate words as hysteria. But then she showed him the papers, correspondence taken from Brother Morai's chambers. Names, dates, descriptions. Among them, Mackenzie's own name. Letters describing him as a potential asset, someone who could be swayed into cooperation with appropriate incentives. The sheriff paled. That one detail convinced him. Martha wasn't just another madwoman. She was a witness to something terrifying, and the network already had him in their sights. 2 days later, the sheriff and a group of men rode out to investigate the camp. What they found chilled them. Nothing. The entire site had been abandoned. Buildings were gutted. Records burned. Every trace of what had taken place wiped clean. Brother Morai and his assistants had vanished, taking with them the remaining women and any other evidence. All that remained were the stained papers Martha had brought, which state authorities soon dismissed as fabricated or misunderstood. The Pennsylvania Attorney General's office conducted a shallow investigation and concluded that the camp was shut down for financial reasons. They claimed the missing women had likely returned to their families or simply moved away. But what no one realized, not even Martha, was that her escape had triggered far more than a local investigation. One of the missing women, Catherine Mueller, wasn't a victim at all. She had been an undercover federal agent. Her real name was Catherine Morrison, part of a secret Treasury Department task force investigating organized human trafficking hidden within religious communities. Her capture had been orchestrated, allowing her to infiltrate one of the network's processing hubs in Philadelphia. The documents Martha had salvaged, combined with Catherine's intelligence, blew the investigation wide open, but it had to be done in silence. The network was deeply embedded, with tendrils reaching every level of government. Over the next 6 months, federal agents moved quietly, arresting key figures across 12 states. The raids disrupted a hidden operation that had enslaved over 400 women since 1845. Yet the mastermind remained free. The mysterious J.R. referenced in the letters was never identified. Without explanation, the investigation simply stopped. Agents received no closure. Files were sealed. Silence returned. Martha Brennan never stopped trying to tell the truth. She spent the rest of her life fighting to be heard, but her voice was drowned out. Newspapers ignored her. Government officials discredited her. Even churches called her delusional, accusing her of slandering holy men. She died in 1867, still holding onto the burden of the women she couldn't save. Her nephew Samuel, who had helped during the federal raids, vanished without a trace. As for Brother Morai, whispers placed him in California, Oregon, even overseas, always just beyond the reach of justice. The official records from the New Light Methodist camp were destroyed in a supposed clerical accident at the Pennsylvania State Archives in 1855. The federal case files were sealed, classified under national security laws. And the land itself? Sold to a mining company. The forest was stripped bare, the soil removed, all physical traces of what happened erased from the earth. But the network didn't die. It evolved. Within 5 years, similar camps appeared in Kansas, Nebraska, and the western frontier. They were more refined, more secretive, using techniques developed during the Pennsylvania experiments. The final harvest Martha had interrupted in 1849 was not canceled, only delayed. Modern historians researching religious communities in the 19th century have uncovered disturbing anomalies. Between 1847 and 1853, census records from Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia show unexplained disappearances of young women, numbers far beyond what could be attributed to marriage, migration, or disease. The 278 confirmed missing from that region were just a fraction. Federal estimates suggest over 2,000 women nationwide may have fallen victim to these hidden operations, making it one of the largest human trafficking rings in American history. In 2019, a demolition crew excavating the former campgrounds of the New Light Methodist community unearthed fragments, burned journals, trinkets, buttons, and bone fragments. Handwritten notes matched the accounts from Martha's testimony. But the discovery was swiftly buried. The site was sealed, the artifacts classified. The truth, once again, hidden behind the veil of national security. Brother Morai's doctrine never died. It morphed, reshaped itself into new ideologies, new justifications. His belief that some are destined to rule, to own, to dominate, still echoes in fringe religious sects, private organizations, and clandestine cults. The methods of psychological control and obedience born in those Pennsylvania woods were passed down, refined, reused. The shadows Martha fled through in 1849 still exist, and they still hide predators cloaked in faith. Her courage saved dozens of lives. But the war she fought is far from over. Her story reminds us that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it wears the robes of holiness. Sometimes it speaks in prayers and psalms. And sometimes it burns everything before we can ask why. Do you believe her story is over? Or are there truths still buried, still pulsing beneath America's religious soil? Let us know in the comments. If this tale shook you, and you want more dark histories, subscribe, hit that bell, and share it with those who believe in uncovering hidden truths. Because the shadows of the past are not gone. They're just waiting for someone brave enough to chase them. See you in the next video.